And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The Liberty Podcast is brought to you by Proven Arms and Outfitters, specializing in rifles, pistols, tactical gear, and more. Learn more at ProvenOutfitters.com.
Welcome back to the Liberty Podcast. It is the 8th day of August, 2024. We're glad you found us again today, coming to you from an undisclosed location in the beautiful Carolina Mountains. As always, we are brought to you by Proven Arms and Outfitters, with tactical gear and rifles and pistols and everything you need to be a Second Amendment law-abiding citizen. Proven Arms and Outfitters. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 19th day that Kamala Harris has avoided media engagement. She hasn't answered a question. Not even, how are you? Or, isn't this lovely weather? Or, what do you think about the Marxist that you selected as your vice president? Nothing. 19th day. Another milestone has fallen. We are marking the 50th anniversary of the resignation of President Richard M. Nixon, August 8th, 1974. And with the passage of a half century, I think we've concluded, anyone paying attention, that this was not merely a resignation prompted by the cover-up of a third-rate burglary, as was the narrative 50 years ago. This was part of a coup that forced Nixon out. And in fact, many of his advisors begged him not to resign. And that didn't happen. 50 years ago today, Richard Nixon resigned the presidency at noon tomorrow. Remember that? Ladies and gentlemen, you can't make this stuff up. We have now the Democrat ticket for president. It's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Apparently, Harris did not have the balls to select the overwhelming favorite vice presidential pick, Ben Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, because apparently he's a little too Jewish for these anti-Semitic times in which we live. And that gives us Tim Walz from Minnesota. They're going to try to tell you he's a friendly old Midwestern guy with a ball cap who long ago was a high school football coach, and by golly, what's not to love? Well, apparently there's a lot of things not to love. So I've been doing a little research on your behalf to get us up to speed on what's going on. This is a very interesting take on the Trump road map to victory now that the opponent and her running mate are known, at least for the moment. This was actually delivered in 3 parts. The first one from a well-known pundit named Andrew Sullivan, who is a virulent Trump hater, but he wrote this. He tried to explain why he was torn about supporting Harris's candidacy, and in doing so, gave Trump some free advice. Kamala Harris, he wrote, well, she's another thing entirely. A politician who has fervently embraced identity politics as central to her understanding of the world, and is the most left-wing candidate to be nominated for president by a major political party in American history. The record is somewhat difficult to ignore. He's right. Harris favored decriminalizing illegal border crossings, free health care for all illegal immigrants. She funded bail for the Black Lives Matter rioters and urged others to do the same. She supports the abolition of private health insurance. She fully would ban fracking, and she would replace ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. She said we ought to just start from scratch with ICE. How about that? She is committed to the woke concept of equity, which means ensuring that all identity groups end up in the same place. Now that's part one of the roadmap. Here's part two. Trump needs to run an avalanche of compare and contrast TV ads. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? Describing her updated views on various issues. She's not against fracking. She's for it. She no longer believes in the abolition of private health care. She's reconsidered, and now she thinks it's essential to get rid of private health care. She no longer, you know the ads, you've seen these kind of ads. You contrast. Part three, you steal a line from the George W. campaign of 20 years ago when he said of John Kerry that he was for it before he was against it. Well, now Kamala Harris, she was for it before she was against it. She can't be trusted. She surfs on the wind. She'll say anything to get elected. She's just saying what she's saying because she thinks you're stupid enough to believe it. The 1, 2, 3 playbook has worked before, and it can work again. It's effective because it's not untrue. Isn't that the truth? Boy, oh boy. So that little roadmap, I should note, was provided to us by an excellent writer and observer of all things political and cultural named John Ellis, who writes a very pithy daily news summary called News Items. Very catchy. Very catchy. I've got one thing to say to Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. Mr. Vance, tear down Tim Walz. And it's so easy to do. Our friends over at townhall.com gave us the 7 obvious ways in which Tim Walz has proven to be a Marxist, a socialist, certainly not a defender of American values, both as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and now in his second of 2 terms as governor of Minnesota. Here they are. In addition to his worst transgression of all, which we'll get to, he has committed an act of stolen valor, given his claims about his role in the National Guard. But we'll get to that. Here's what he would do and has done. He has done. Let's say it straight. Pediatric medical mutilation, regardless of parental consent. This is a real thing in Minnesota. Children who wish to change genders and keep that from their parents are encouraged to do so. Encouraged. And if the parents try to intervene, the parents are the ones who are taken out of the equation, not the kid. Of course, full-throated socialism. He enabled the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots in Minneapolis following the death by drug overdose of big fat George Floyd, a known criminal with a record who was who led to the false accusation, his death, of a Minnesota cop having committed the act of murder for which he's serving prison time, which never happened. What followed were days and days of riots that started in Minneapolis and spread across the country. In Minneapolis, the governor of Minnesota stood by, kept the National Guard away as streets were terrorized, businesses were burned. There's tape of Tim Walz's wife saying she kept the window open of their Minneapolis home so she could smell the burning rubber. It smelled to her like liberty. She's nuts. She's married to a nut. He restored the voting rights of 55,000 convicted felons. During the pandemic, he was one of the worst governors in the nation in imposing tyranny on people, in locking down businesses, in closing everything under the sun, and in encouraging citizens to snitch on one another whenever they detected that people were gathering in groups larger than had been mandated by the great Tim Walz. We saw this in North Carolina. It was 10 times worse in Minnesota under Tim Walz. he is a big advocate. This is funny because it's so dumb. Free tuition for illegal immigrants and driver's licenses. So they get to go to college on our dime. They get driver's licenses. And then what did they do with them? Oh, I don't know. Drive drunk, kill people. And they can register to do what? Vote. Non-citizens. Come one, come all. Vote early, vote often in Minnesota. Tim Walz is a open, unapologetic fan of full birth abortion. Baby is born. Mother has a change of heart. Baby is dead. In Minnesota. In Minnesota. Last but not least, he is a climate change fanatic who supports all of the things that Kamala Harris purports to do if she's elected, which, God help us, never happens, including, mandates on electric vehicles, reduction in carbon footprints, regardless of the real cost to people and their everyday lives. Just the little things. Just the little things. Now, I want to get back to the stolen valor issue with Tim Walz. All right, we've seen the C-SPAN interview from, over 20 years ago when he said that his National Guard unit was deployed in Operation Enduring Freedom.
And your military background?
I spent 24 years in the National Guard, some of that full-time. I was an artilleryman. I deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom.
Well, they went. Yes, his unit went, but he didn't go because he retired upon learning that deployment was inevitable. He didn't want to go out to foreign soil and risk his life for his country. The National Guard gig had run its course for him when things got, a little dicey. We know that. He also, according to the great Sebastian Gorka and his America First podcast, while a National Guardsman, Tim Walz was frequently visiting China. In fact, he lived in China for a brief period of time while a member of the National Guard. Now, with the clearance that comes with being a National Guardsman, and Seb Gorka points this out, you don't just go to foreign communist countries like China and hang out. But apparently, Tim Walz thought that was the thing to do, the right thing to do. You can't make it up. We also have an interview that Seb did with a Green Beret who is now a member of Congress, who pointed out very clearly that when you are a certain rank in the National Guard and you fail to complete all of the training that goes with that, you don't get to keep that rank. So he claims he's a commanding sergeant in the National Guard, but by the time he retired, he was back down to being a sergeant major. A sergeant major. But all of his MO on his service to his country has been that he was this high-ranking officer with the National Guard. Not true. In fact, it has now been revealed that the Harris campaign has quietly gone into the campaign website and, shall we say, modified Governor Walz's bio, subtly, just to take the lies out. They even Kamala and her campaign strategists realize how damning this is. Normally they just ignore stuff or don't talk to the media about it. In this case, they realize it could be a problem, a real problem. Will Tim Walz be the George McGovern's Thomas Eagleton of 1972? Many of you know that story. Eagleton was selected, not well vetted. Turned out he had been treated for mental health problems, and lickety-split, he was off the ticket. Will Tim Walz be lickety-split from Kamala's ticket? Remains to be seen. Keep an eye out for that. It's a real possibility. Then who will she pick? Attila the Hun? I don't know. Hillary Clinton? Scary to think about. All right, folks. I think many of you remember in 2022 when a lifelong Democrat and former Congresswoman named Tulsi Gabbard, who also wore the uniform with distinction, she walked away from the Democrat Party. She denounced her registration as a Democrat. She became an independent voter. And not only did she do it, she went on record as saying why she did it. Because she felt she had been betrayed by the Democrats over a period of time and could no longer justify having the D, as in Democrat, next to her name. So in that period of time, over the past couple of years since she walked away from the Dems, she has become sort of a media personality. You have seen her talk about presidential aspirations in the future. She's a very articulate person. In fact, there were people advocating for Donald Trump to consider her as his running mate at one point. Anyway, recently, at the end of July the 23rd to be precise, Tulsi Gabbard was a guest on Laura Ingram's television program, during which Tulsi Gabbard ran down the laundry list of reasons to be very concerned about Kamala Harris ever being president of the United States. She repeated many of the things that we just talked about, and in her very articulate and direct way, as you might imagine. What happens? 2 days later, Tulsi Gabbard and her husband depart for some air travel. They had a couple of trips planned, including a stop in Oklahoma where she's still a reservist in the Army. Well, during the course of the travel that was to follow starting July 25th, all of a sudden, she began to notice that every one of her boarding passes was designated as Quad S, SSSS. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means because I wrote it down, ladies and gentlemen. It means secondary security screening selection, which is a nice way of saying additional TSA attention to your person and your belongings. All of a sudden, and now for the past couple of weeks, everywhere she goes, Tulsi Gabbard is encountered by extra security. In fact, it has come to light that when she's physically on these flights, these are commercial flights, there are multiple air marshals, as many as 3 air marshals traveling with her, unbeknownst to her, everywhere she goes. There is a explosive detection expert in this group. Everywhere she goes, she is trailed by multiple air marshals under the Quiet Skies program, which is supposed to be looking for bad guys. Instead, they've decided that Tulsi Gabbard is a threat to your safety while traveling by commercial air in this country. Obviously, they are attempting to intimidate her. It's not going to work, but it is appalling. Now, keep in mind that we've just gone through a patch here where we've learned that the Secret Service is incapable of protecting Donald Trump during his campaign for re-election as President of the United States. This has been a very damning situation. Now we're finding out that they have no trouble assigning all manner of air marshals to Tulsi Gabbard. This began with a whistleblower going to an organization called Uncovered DC. The whistleblower said that Gabbard has been singled out as a terror threat under the Quiet Skies program. Wow. Then when interviewed, Gabbard said the whistleblower's account matches my experience. Everything lines up to the day. To the day. She said this interrogation happened every time I boarded. She said that she tends to pack light, but it doesn't matter. Quote, I've got a couple of blazers in my luggage, and they're squeezing every inch of the entire collar, every inch of the sleeves, every inch of the edging of the blazers. They're squeezing or patting down underwear, bras, workout clothes, every inch of every piece of clothing. Agents unzip the lining inside the rollerboard of her suitcase. Gabbard was asked to take every piece of electronics out and turn each on, including her military phone and computer. The other strange thing she said was, quote, "I use my military ID to get through security sometimes." She was on her way to Oklahoma. She was having trouble at security, and one of the TSA agents said, "Well, wait a minute. You're military. How in the world is there a quad S on your boarding pass?" She said, "I'd like to know the same thing. I have no idea." Wow. She goes on to say in her interview with Matt Taibbi, who's an investigative reporter who posts a lot of content to Substack.com. Tulsi says, "This is not a woe is me situation. It's bringing to the forefront how brazen the political retaliation and abuse of power continues to be under the Biden-Harris administration." Isn't that the truth? Dr. Robert Malone, who was roundly criticized by the mainstream media during the pandemic. He's one of the inventors of the mRNA vaccine. He came out and said, don't use the mRNA vaccine to treat COVID-19. It's not going to work. It could have, in fact, side effects. He was demonized for that. He writes in his own blog, "At least 3 years ago, I became aware that the risk of Quiet Skies interrogation because a subset of the physicians I have toured with were receiving the 4S designation and have been subjected to repeated and unpredictable secondary security screening while traveling by air. In at least one case, a female physician was pulled out of line, questioned at length, and subjected to both strip searching and body cavity searching. Just as a warning, if anyone comments that they want more details of what strip and body cavity searching means, I will assume Trowlery and block." It's pretty invasive is what he's trying to say. Here's the other thing that you got to keep in mind about these programs. The cost of assigning these air marshals. There was congressional testimony that something to the tune of $400 million goes down the tubes using these air marshals for purposes that they were never intended to be trained for. You know, hailing innocent people through airports and on airplanes. Tulsi Gabbard, the latest example of that. All right, folks. Remember the World Health Organization? Remember how prominent they were in directing governments around the world to lock down during the pandemic and to impose mandates to get everyone vaccinated with these non-vaccines, which were really experimental use vaccines? Well, folks, they're back. They're back. They've decided we need to get hyped up about the forthcoming threat of monkeypox. Monkeypox, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to the phones on this one. Working here from my remote location, I'm forced to use alternative ways to bring you my research. Why the sudden interest in Mpox? An article quickly compiled by Science magazine explains that the more deadly variant is spreading in Africa. But of course, the main thrust of the article is actually this, writes Robert W. Malone. The World Health Organization is appealing for more help after the troubling development, which it fears could be a precursor to a new monkeypox epidemic just 2 years after a milder strain spread worldwide. Writes the WHO, a further scaling up of Mpox responses underway in affected countries is urgently needed amid the expanding outbreak. Oh no! But the reporting page on the WHO goes on to say that with the exception of countries in West and Central Africa, amongst those countries for whom Mpox cases have been reported, the ongoing outbreak continues to primarily affect men who have sex with men. At present, there is no signal suggesting sustained transmission beyond these networks. Confirmation of one case of Mpox in a country is considered an outbreak. Okay, so that's where we are with the Mpox. If you start hearing more about that, and the WHO has convened an emergency session, even as we speak, And Dr. Robert Malone says, ignore it. It's just fear porn, coming as it does as we approach another presidential election. You think the WHO wants Donald Trump back in the White House? Think again, ladies and gentlemen. I want to go out on a bit of an uplifting note. You may have noted the other day a victory in the Paris Olympic Games in track and field by an American named Gabby Thomas. She won the 200-meter event rather decisively, coming 3 years after she won a bronze in the same event at the delayed 2021 Tokyo Olympic Games. I just noticed that, number one, she comes off as such a joyous and proud Olympian. We haven't always seen that in recent years among our Americans. In fact, we saw at the outset of these Olympics athletes who refused to acknowledge the national anthem and the American flag. But I like the Gabby Thomas story. She was raised by a single mom who taught her the value of education. She pursued a degree and graduated from Harvard University. She then relocated to Austin, Texas, and received a master's degree from the University of Texas at Austin in neurobiology. This is an incredible story. And when interviewed by the press in Paris after her victory, she said that when she realized that she had won and when it all met, that she didn't realize how much it would mean to her when they wrapped that American flag around her shoulders and she was able to run the victory lap in the stadium in Paris. And she talked openly about how proud she was to be an American, to be representing her country. And I just think it's great when we see the story of an athlete who grew up, in not ideal circumstances, who did not claim victimhood, who is not using the Olympics as a platform for political agendas, who is just a wonderful role model, both away from track and field, academically, and on the track as an Olympic champion now. Gabby Thomas, that's a story you need to share with your kids. And boy, we need more Gabby Thomases on our Olympic teams going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Liberty Podcast. It is 8 August 2024. We're so glad you joined us again. We're going to keep doing this until we get it right and until we make sure that as many of you are informed and ready for the fight ahead to make America great again. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on the Liberty Podcast.